Hello everyone, I'm glad you're able to attend this seminar on using GIS to evaluate local flooding areas in your communities. We hope that you'll find this to be useful in your day-to-day application and to make your job just a little bit easier. Before we get into the topic, I want to briefly introduce you to ERA. We are a municipal engineering firm with a staff of over 40 professionals providing civil, structural, environmental, and land surveying services. For over 30 years, we've specialized in helping communities solve their stormwater challenges, whether through regional stormwater studies or part of transportation projects. Our goal today, however, is to focus on you and your community. We want to give you ideas into how you can leverage your current GIS investment to make decisions about drainage and potential flooding conditions. My name is John Mayer, one of the principals here at ERA. With me today will be a team of individuals who on a daily basis address the issues we will be talking about today. First is Jenny Lowenstein, our Senior Water Resources Engineer. She brings 16 years of stormwater engineering experience and, as you will see shortly, a passion for creating handy stormwater tools for everyday use. Molly Garrow has had countless of backyard discussions with residents talking about their drainage concerns. She will bring that practical perspective to her discussion today. And Mike Meslowski has expertise working with community-wide watershed analysis like the City of Kenosha and others. He will highlight how GIS has been a huge time saver for him in performing detailed stormwater analysis. Today's objective is to provide simple tools and strategies to use the GIS data your community has already invested in to make more informed stormwater decisions and to look at manageable ways to perform other time-efficient applications in the future. The presentation is structured into different tiers of complexity, so that no matter where your community is on the GIS spectrum, we'll show you how your GIS data has powerful applications. So after our presentation, we hope you'll be able to walk away with one or two ways to be able to work smarter rather than harder. So on that, I'd like to introduce to you Jenny Lowenstein, who will discuss the first level of GIS applications.
Thanks, John. We're going to start the 101 portion of the presentation on how to use GIS maps with hydraulic features to inform development in your community. Before we talk about the application of using the maps, let's go through some examples of the kind of hydraulic features that can be created and shown on these H&H GIS maps. Here are the basic three hydrologic and hydraulic items that ERA creates using GIS scripts that can be shown on these maps. They are GIS maps that show the overland flow paths, the depressional storage areas, and watershed basins. We're going to focus on the use of them in this 101 portion of the presentation. In addition, we'll talk about other useful map information that can be obtained from various entities that are helpful to include in these H&H GIS maps. The first hydraulic feature that can be created is to map the overland flow paths in your community. What these maps can show is when you have heavy rains and saturated soil conditions, where is the water flowing above the surface, regardless of storm sewers and outside of obvious creek beds. Let's zoom in on this map and talk about what exactly this can look like on a GIS exhibit. All right, so we've zoomed in on a typical residential neighborhood in this community. This neighborhood was constructed prior to this community's stormwater ordinance that now requires planned and designed overland flow routes. Without any plan, it is not immediately clear where water goes, even if looking at a contour map. You'd have to probably mark it up to be able to identify the paths. So what do these lines in different colors show? It's showing the overland flow paths with these light to dark blue lines. If it starts raining at the top of this image, water can flow down this path. The different shades represent the amount of drainage being collected along that path. We found it helpful to split up the drainage areas as we've shown it here. We begin showing an overland flow path when just 1 acre of drainage area is tributary to that spot. Then we progressively show more and more drainage area. This really can demonstrate the magnitude of water that is flowing over land. The second hydraulic feature that is helpful to define and map is depressional storage areas. Depressional storage areas are defined as places that water can pond at least 1 foot of depth. You can identify a depressional area by closed contours. An engineer can use a contour map and hand draw this in. By bringing it into GIS, it allows for that information to be maintained, and when we zoom into this area, additional information can be included. So let's take a closer look. This depressional storage area is color-based on the depth of flooding in feet until water can overtop the depressional area. In this case, the dark red indicates water that has the potential to flood 4 or more feet at the location. Let's hope your detached garage isn't located in that spot. The third hydraulic feature that can prove helpful for communities that have a lot of floodplain or a lot of rivers running through it is some watershed and sub-watershed basin delineations. This map is for a community that is 15 square miles in size and has four major rivers running through it and dissecting it. The watersheds are defined by red, blue, purple, and green, with the sub-watersheds colored as a shade of the watershed it belongs to. Let's zoom into this yellow box area and look at what else it can show. Here we are looking at an area tributary to the West Fork River. The watershed has been divided into major sub-watershed basins, and there are flow paths indicating the sub-watershed's general direction of flow. This is not to be confused with the detailed overland flow paths we talked about previously. Apart from the main 3 hydraulic items we just discussed, overland flow paths, depressional storage areas, and watershed basins, there is additional information that is helpful to include on these H&H GIS maps. They are to add contours, FEMA flood hazards, especially the 100-year floodplain and the floodway, along with any Zone A's, aerial map underneath it so you can see what kind of structures are in your mapped overland flow paths or depressional areas, and lastly, if your community has it, to put the storm sewers on there too. All right, now that we've talked about the maps, let's talk about how we can leverage them to help your community be more resilient to urban flooding during the permitting review process and public interactions. Molly Garrow and I are going to walk you through these 3 categories and provide you with real-world examples of how they are implemented. Molly's going to start us off with permit reviews.
Thanks, Jenny. When issuing permits, many communities have the goal of completing timely but thorough reviews. In some circumstances, communities may even offer same-day or over-the-counter permits for things like sheds, garages, decks, and fences. I'm sure some of you have seen more of these, particularly this year, as people are at home and improving their outdoor spaces. However, a municipality may end up issuing these permits without the review of a water resources engineer. For example, a homeowner with an annotated plat and a contractor's bid may be issued a permit for a new fence in a location that blocks or constricts an overland flow path. To avoid this, but still offer permits in a timely fashion, municipalities can use these H&H maps like they would a utility outlets for a quick review of the homeowner's property. These maps may flag the need for additional review or increased setbacks or clearances to accommodate the overland flows. And ultimately, this protects the homeowner's investment as well. In this example, a subdivision that's about 40 years old has had decades of fences and sheds that have narrowed or completely blocked the overland flow path. This has resulted in numerous drainage complaints. And with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Molly. We're going to talk about something we love, drainage complaints. In some communities, drainage complaints can be part engineering and part therapy. Is this really a drainage issue, or is this just an opportunity for a neighbor to vent? Using overland flow and depressional storage maps can give the responding municipal staff much more information. Is it a local drainage issue or a regional drainage issue? Is it likely a legitimate issue or an exaggerated complaint? Are they experiencing this kind of flooding? And do you have H&H maps that could verify this? Let's do a case study about using the GIS maps for drainage complaints. We were part of a public outreach to solicit drainage complaints. A couple of neighbors in the same block wrote in to say that they experienced river-like flows between their homes. When we plotted their address on top of the GIS Overland flow map, it became obvious what the problem was. The neighbors were by this red star, and they had over 70 acres of drainage area flowing right through their side yards. One of the neighbors sent in a video at the location of that red star that shows the kind of flooding they experienced. So let's zoom in to that area where the drainage complaint was. Given the information we have with the GIS Overland Flow Map features, we know it's going to be a doozy. Let's see if the video confirms that. Well, the real life experience of these residential property owners lines up with the GIS Overland Flow Map. These maps help municipal engineers and staff to have a quick reference to verify and validate the eyewitness account of their residents. It can help you prioritize many drainage complaints too. Molly will finish up the last item in this section.
Our third example of how these maps can be useful for a municipality is during development reviews. Even when engineers design a site plan and the municipality's engineer reviews the site plan, if they don't consider upstream tributary flows, the design may create new flooding conditions or worsen existing flooding conditions for the proposed project and the adjacent properties. These overland flow maps should be used like any other utility atlas. They should be shared with design engineers, and the review engineer should reference them to develop the best site plan. In this example, we look at a vacant lot where a single-family home was built. But because the design was below the municipality's threshold for a BMP, an analysis of the tributary area was not required. The site appeared to have positive slopes, there's a permeable upstream neighbor, and there are storm sewers around the existing site. However, when we zoom out and we look at the overland flow map, we can clearly see there's over 5 acres that are tributary to the site, and it overtops at this location. This was not considered in the site design, and after construction wrapped up, the home flooded within the first 2 months when a spring rain brought 4 feet of water into the basement. This turned into an expensive retrofit that required protecting the lower level, regrading a side yard, and installing new storm drains in the backyard. This cost the homeowner thousands of dollars, required a variance, and a new site design by an engineer. Had an overland flow map been reviewed during the design phase, some of these drainage issues may have been prevented. With that, I'm going to hand things off to Mike, and he's going to take us through the second level of GIS mapping.
Thanks, Molly. Now I'll take things a step further and discuss how GIS can be an invaluable tool in conjunction with the modeling used to design and implement capital improvement projects. Worry not, even a GIS program in infancy can be of great assistance to modeling efforts. With more developed GIS programs that include, for example, complete detailed information of stormwater assets, the benefits of H&H modeling efforts increases exponentially as it frees up an engineer's time for analysis and implementation of projects instead of data collection and input. Lastly, I'll discuss how model results can be exported back into GIS for further analysis, which allows for better visualization of data for engineers and stakeholders to make decisions. Even a municipality with a limited GIS program can produce the base H&H maps that Jenny had described before. At a minimum, only topographic data is needed to produce a base H&H map, which is typically available on a county level. The base H&H maps can be utilized to quickly identify problem areas and focus modeling efforts only where they are needed. Here we have an example base H&H map that shows the overflow routes and depressional areas within a subwatershed. These maps were used in conjunction with flooding reports, staff knowledge, and resident surveys to verify that the problem areas warranted detailed modeling. Let's zoom in on problem area R1 for further discussion. Here you can more clearly see the depressional areas and numerous overland flow routes contributing to this problem area. This area had also received reports of severe and frequent flooding. Therefore, a model was created to produce recommended improvements. In this case, an existing conditions XP Swim 2D model was created by importing topographic and storm surge data from GIS. If GIS data was not available for the storm surge system, field survey or utility atlases could have been utilized to create the model. Regardless, the base H&H maps were of great value in creating a targeted approach for which areas to perform detailed modeling. Now let's see the results from the model. Here's the existing 100-year critical duration flooding results for the same problem area. Raster data was exported from XP Swim to create this exhibit in GIS. Now let's compare the modeler results to the original H&H base maps. Here you can see that the model shows overland flow routes and depressional areas that closely match those shown in the base H&H map. This goes to show how H&H base maps are a valuable tool in identifying problem areas. Lastly, it should be noted that other modeling programs also allow for importation and exportation of GIS data. And here's the preferred alternative for the same problem area. Structural flooding risk was eliminated. The proposed 100-year flooding extents were exported from the model to create this exhibit. Based on the good quality of this municipality's GIS data, the time it took from the start of building the model to recommending a preferred alternative for their 2021 capital improvement program was about a week and a half. Robust GIS data allows for direct importation into models, greatly reducing times it takes an engineer to build the model. This can reduce budget or free up an engineer's time away from data entry to allow for a more thorough analysis of proposed solutions. When I mention robust GIS data in regards to modeling, it simply means having completed attributes for the storm surge systems. The more attributes, the better. Here's an example of a community with a very robust GIS database for their storm surge system that was a pleasure to work with. They had to put a lot of effort in collecting storm surge information, which included attributes useful for modeling. Attributes are easily assignable to variables in the model, and in this case, the model was completely built with a single click of the import button. On the contrary, databases with many null attributes ends up requiring manual entry of data. Locations of pipes and structures can still be imported into the model, but ultimately they are just lines in space and will require further data collection to manually input into the model. I should also mention, while not imported into the model, having robust data for other infrastructure assets, such as sanitary and water main, helps avoid conflicts when producing proposed alternatives. The beauty of working with models that utilize GIS is that data transfer can go both ways. Results data exported from a model can be displayed and further analyzed using tools available in GIS. Here's an example of model output data that was converted into flooding extents, elevations, and depths in GIS. Showing the same results 3 different ways side by side in a single GIS exhibit allows for quick analysis of flooding results. For an example, an engineer would be keen on the fact that color changes in the elevation maps when indicate areas of conveyance versus areas with static colors that indicate level pools of ponding. With such information, an engineer can make better decisions when producing proposed solutions. Spatial analysis tools within GIS can be used to create relations between various sets of data available in GIS. For example, this exhibit compares the model's flooding elevation to adjacent grade information of structures. When the flooding elevation exceeds a certain threshold above the adjacent grade, it was shown to be at risk for flooding as represented by the structure shown in red. This allows for a quick quantification of impacted structures for cost-benefit analysis. And now back to Jenny to discuss how GIS can be used to regulate.
All right. The final use of GIS maps with hydraulic features is to be able to regulate development against them. At the end of the day, having the maps codified gives your community more power to require development to meet design objectives to keep it reasonably safe from flooding. To get to a place where the maps are codified and you're able to use them to regulate development, it's best if you have been using them as described back in the 101 portion of the presentation. Why? Well, as you know, regulation is very political and contentious. You're going to have to prove to your board that it is a useful and necessary means of protecting constituents from flooding. Also, by having the maps as a reference back as discussed in Level 101 or to guide important capital improvement plans discussed in 201, you're creating a vocabulary that the politicians and residents and businesses get used to hearing. Vocabulary such as overland flow route, drainage area, depressional storage, overflow location. So when it is time to finally update your stormwater code, the language and the usefulness has already been proven. It is much easier to start there and graduate to this step, 301, than to have not started at 101. Let me go through a brief example of a community that is successfully regulating to their H&H GIS maps. In 2007, the Village of Downers Grove approved a watershed infrastructure improvement plan that included mapping depressional storage areas that they labeled as LPDAs, localized poor drainage areas. Previously, these LPDAs had been identified by the county in the mid-1980s. However, they were only identified and no elevations established. So they decided to regulate some of the depressional storage area if they had one closed contour on the topographic map, had a minimum of 3 acres of drainage area to it, was not contained solely on an undeveloped parcel or a park-owned parcel, and if it was not contained solely on public right-of-way, or if it was not contained mostly within the regulatory floodplain. That reduced the number of depressional storage areas that were then hydraulically modeled to establish a base flood elevation. The community then codified these areas and regulated to them similarly to the floodplain. Development in these defined depressional storage areas required compensatory storage or floodproofing, as shown in this picture of a detached garage next to a shed built prior to the codified maps, or the structures would need to be raised to provide freeboard. Enforcing these restrictions is not always easy, but it reduces the amount of flood damage property owners experience, and that is ultimately the goal of regulation. That concludes our presentation on how to use H&H GIS maps in your community. We have some time now to take questions. Thank you.